I had this really romantic notion of farm life when I was a small child. I loved to read books about it. I loved to watch movies that took place on a farm. It was very unrealistic. It was very much shaped by like Hollywood and storybooks. And I was just wooed by it. I was fascinated by it. But it wasn't real, it wasn't like real life. It wasn't enough to drive me. It was an interest and a fascination. And I believe that was in me because God put it in me. Because I believe he puts the desires in our heart in us. But as I grew up and I had children, when Asher, my son who is now 15 years old, was born, he had a severe dairy allergy, and I was breastfeeding him. And he was having these horrific rashes and screaming spells and all of this stuff. And within about 3 weeks of him being born, we pinned down that I needed to do an elimination diet if I was going to continue to nurse him. And so I did. And we nailed down that he was very allergic to dairy products. And I mean like everything. If it had even just traces of whey in it, he was going to be really messed up if I ate it. And so for the first time in my life, I was young. I had my children when I was young. I was 21. And for the first time in my life, I started reading food labels. Prior to that, I never had. Cooking for me prior to that was opening boxes and cans. And so I started reading food labels. And at that point, a why developed in me for food. I at that point was driven to local food sources. I was driven to farmers markets, wasn't growing anything yet. But I had this why. I needed real food. I needed to source it. I needed to be able to afford it. And I had a very real need in that if I didn't do it, my child was going to be in pain. And for a mother, there's no better motivator than that. But what happened was Asher grew up, and he didn't have to have that anymore. And so my why, though it was very, very impactful in one season, it didn't age into the next season. I still had the interest, but it did not have the urgency anymore. And at that point, I had kind of started like reading stuff, going to different farms, and I remember feeling like I remember realizing the urgency is gone. If I don't find another push to do this, I'm not going to stick with it. I'm going to give up because it was hard. And I remember reading this book. It's by Barbara Kingsolver. Animal Vegetable Miracle is what it's called. If you guys have never read that book, it is fantastic, and I still reread it regularly. And in this book, she was talking about heirloom seed catalogs. And she talked about them with such romance and with such a way with words. And she was saying, the way that some women look at Tiffany catalogs is how I look at the Baker Creek seed catalog. And that's when I ordered my first Baker Creek seed catalog. I fell in love. And it was like that childhood romance that had been deposited in me in a small way got exploded into something massive. And I realized there's a whole world of goodness that if I do not put my hard work to it, I will never experience. There are things that grow and food that can be made and animals that can be raised and products that can be had that I will never have from a grocery store. And I found the first lasting why. I found the pleasure that comes in food and the joy that comes in it. And I tell people now, don't do this just to survive. Do this to thrive. Because there's an opportunity here for you to experience something extraordinary. That if you don't say, I'll roll my sleeves up, I might puke and I'll keep going. I'm going to sweat my tail off. I'm going to work really hard. My back may hurt. This might make me extremely uncomfortable. But I see the prize at the end of this thing and I'm going after it. That was my first real big why.